The new series by Ken Burns, The Roosevelts, An Intimate History, uses the filmmaker's hallmark style of illuminating history through personal stories. The 14-hour epic, which begins on Sunday at New Mexico PBS, delves into the histories of Theodore, Eleanor, and Franklin D. Roosevelt. It's the first time all three of the stories have been interwoven into a single narrative, and together they illuminate some of the most tumultuous moments in American history. Santa Fe resident Paul Barnes is the lead producer and supervising film editor on the project, and has been Ken Burns' principal film editor since 1984. I spoke with him about why the Roosevelts are such compelling subjects for historical narrative. Paul Barnes, thank you for stopping by and seeing us on this amazing project. I've had a chance to watch most of it so far. I'm enthralled with what you've put together. Now, as lead producer and main editor, I got to ask you, this seems like it was an incredible amount of work for just you and your team. Talk about that a little bit. How difficult was this to put together?
It was an enormous endeavor. It really was. We're covering almost over 150 years of history, right, with three major characters, all the rest of the family as supporting players. So the amount of research that went into it in terms of gathering photographs and stock footage was enormous. And then the work to actually film the historic sites, to dress the sets as if they were living there. I mean, it was just an endless amount of work.
How do you make those kind of choices? I mean, 22,000 photographs, I understand you had to go through.
Right.
Is it a team effort? Do you get the last call on shots? Does Ken get the last call on these things?
Ken, in the editing room, Ken always has the last call.
Okay.
So we're constantly changing images because he doesn't care. It doesn't seem to be working for him. But my own feeling is that we wanted to gather as much as possible so that the editors would have as wide a range of choice as possible. You know, it's the expression on the faces in the photographs. Are they happy? Are they sad? Are they reflective? And they work for the emotions in the script for certain moments. So you want to make sure that you have enough to be able to make those moments come alive and have the audience feel as if it's happening in front of them. I mean, that's the whole thing that behind Ken's work is he talks about emotional archaeology. That we're trying to bring history alive for people in the present, and we try to do that through emotion. Less through any kind of abstract historical analysis. And that really affects people. If you affect people through the heart, it somehow gets in here a little bit better. That's the way he's always felt, you know. And he's a storyteller. I mean, he feels like the best way to learn history is to tell the story of history. And that's what's going to grab people.
What did you discover personally about the Roosevelts that really zinged you that you didn't consider previously?
Oh, man. Let me put it, the most revealing thing to me was Theodore, which he's the one person I didn't know that much about. And to find out how progressive his politics were and how those politics kept changing and getting actually more progressive the older he got. So that by the time he was running for the Progressive Party in 1912 as a third-party candidate, you know, he was proposing national health insurance. That was a big surprise to me, you know. And I think it was such a smart thing on his part, after having lived through the Gilded Age and been a part of that aristocracy that controlled the country in the Gilded Age. I think that Theodore really saw if the country was going to move forward and fulfill the promise of American democracy the way it was founded, then we had to be very careful not to let an aristocracy be created in this country. That things had to be more equitable. It had to be much fairer across the board. And that was the vision that he had, and I think he was spot on in that regard. And so everything he tried to do was an attempt to push the country in that direction. And he saw the country changing from an agricultural society to an industrial society, and that was also part of the necessity of doing that at the time. I think he was very smart about that.
But the whole idea of a patrician family, these people could have done anything they wanted, made a lot of money, we would have never known about them. In your view, what was it about that family that made them make other choices to contribute to what the country was all about? What did you glean from that?
I mean, I think it was the whole concept of noblesse oblige.
Yeah.
You know, certain wealthy families feel this necessity to give back.
Right.
You know, they feel so lucky themselves in the way that their lives have gone, that they feel that now they want to make a part of their lives a way of giving back and improving things across the board. But Theodore was, for example, influenced by his father, you know, who had basically inherited the wealth and then went into philanthropy in a big way. And that was very influential on Theodore, to watch his father do that, because he adored his father. And it was the same way with Franklin and his family. That whole aspect of noblesse oblige was very much present in the Hyde Park Roosevelts as well. And his mother impressed that upon Franklin as well. So both of those young men carried that into their political careers.
As a family dynamic and how influential it was, how deep do you think those hooks were set for these people, their families?
They were incredibly deep. They really were, in both positive and negative ways. This notion of giving back that I mentioned before was definitely ingrained in them. But I think that Theodore's warmongering, in a way, was a direct outgrowth of his father having been a substitute, hiring a substitute in the Civil War and not having fought for the country. There was also, I think he always felt a bit of shame about, that was the one thing about his father that he was so unhappy about and needed to rectify. And it pushed him in that direction, which was often over the top.
Right. Let me stop you there and ask you about that. You give TR an unblinking, unvarnished look at that very part of his life where war was being made and decisions were being. He was an imperialist.
Yes.
He wanted to go out there and take territory.
Yes.
Talk about those decisions between you and Ken. How far did you want to go with that in his story particularly? Well,
I think it's the truth of his history. I mean, he was a major imperialist. He was very happy that we annexed Hawaii. He was hell-bent on getting Spain out of the New World. He wanted to take the Philippines. He was also thinking ahead. He thought that the Philippines and the Hawaiian Islands would be buffer zones against Asia because he saw the rise of the power in Japan. He was always forward-thinking in terms of foreign policy. I think, too, that he had a 19th century sensibility about war, that there was something noble and honorable about it. It was part of that shame he felt from his father, that he felt like to be a real man, you should go and fight for your country. You should be wounded, you should be blooded, and lay down some blood for your own nation. And I think that really propelled him into some bad decisions in terms of, promoting the Spanish-American War and the craziness that went on in Cuba and his own recklessness, during those battles in Cuba. It was all a part of that for him.
Yeah. How about Eleanor? What really surprised me too was the difficulties she faced in her childhood as well. A lot of loneliness, not connected to a lot of family. Her mom had died. And tell me about how you think that affected her relationship with Franklin in that whole dynamic.
Well, it's very interesting because I think that Eleanor felt a great deal of insecurity through her whole childhood and adolescence. Never feeling wanted, never feeling loved. She felt the only person who really did love her was her tragically alcoholic father, who she kind of idolized and glorified in all the wrong ways. So that she was always kind of searching for a love that would have come from her parents in childhood, something that she just never really had. I think she was always seeking that. And when she met Franklin, I think she was surprised to find that she found it. I think that the two of them were very deeply in love when they first met and married. And he gave her things that she was missing, which was that love she always wanted, and respect for her mind. And she gave him, it's interesting he chose Eleanor because in many ways he chose her because she was so interested in intellectual issues. There was a kind of, always a kind of forward-thinkingness in Eleanor, even from an early age. It was ingrained in her by her schooling in England with Madame Souvestre. And so, for example, in the film we talk about how Eleanor takes Franklin to the tenement houses because she was a volunteer there, teaching these poor children on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And that was his first experience of seeing that kind of poverty. And those kinds of things he was getting from Eleanor were, again, revelatory to him and was a part of this character that was building across those early years between the two of them. But then when Franklin betrays her with the affair with Lucy Mercer, her whole world just collapses. That kind of foundation he had given her of that love, she couldn't trust anymore. And after that, I think she was always on a kind of search for a companion who would provide that for her, And the substitute for that was to work like the devil as a major public servant.
Just tireless.
Tireless, absolutely tireless.
Absolutely amazing. It's a great quote from Jeffrey Ward, Ken's fellow writer and producer as well. He said, "I hope viewers get a sense of what American leadership can be and not settle for less." It's a brilliant quote. And
Yes.
I have to say, when I watched this, I very much felt like I was considering our own system of government right now in real time while I'm watching the Roosevelts do their thing. Are we at some sort of end of the Roosevelt era here? Has their influence in fact started to wane, or are we still in it, as they say?
I think, unfortunately, it has started to wane.
Okay.
I think the concept that people have in this country of public service has just fallen apart. Nobody seems to be willing to give unequivocally without getting back in some way. There's got to be some kind of quid pro quo.
Right.
I think that the partisan politics are so extreme that the unwillingness to compromise is a real shame. I mean, throughout the political careers of both Theodore and Franklin, they couldn't have achieved anything without having compromised with the opposite party when they were in power. They did it constantly. They were brilliant politicians and they knew how to compromise. They knew how to wheel and deal so that they could get at least a part of what they wanted.
Right.
If they didn't get it all, then maybe later we can tweak it and change it. And
In fact, Franklin picked up on some of Theodore's stuff from earlier.
Exactly.
It's amazing.
You know,
Yeah.
I mean, Theodore was so disappointed because his platform from the Progressive Party was not going to become a reality, having not become president, or he thought so anyway. I mean, Wilson did do some very good things. You know, but Franklin always felt, I think, that the New Deal programs were an offshoot of the kind of policies Theodore was thinking during that Progressive Party campaign.
Thank you very much for coming. What a great series. I have to congratulate you. It's constantly a learning experience, and I think it's just a great watch. Thank you for coming in.
Well, thank you so much for
Come
having
back
me.
and see us next time.
I appreciate it.
You got it.